And we're good.
Thank you, Virginia. Good evening and welcome to the Borough Council Special Meeting, January 31st, 2024. Instead of it 2043.
See that?
At 7 p.m. In attendance, we have Ms. Lopez, Ms. Zimmer was absent, Ms. Kehoe,
Here.
Mr. Beston,
Here.
Mr. Mitchell,
Here.
Mayor Kelly is absent, Mr. Guzza,
Present.
Mr. Shields,
Present.
and Solicitor Scrolla.
Here.
Thank you. Okay, we don't seem to have any public comment tonight, so we'll move right on to our discussion.
Before we get into discussions, you may have heard it on the news or read it in the paper, but I want to get it announced to you guys. It is on our website. It is on the bulletin board. It has been in the paper in the news and I wanted it on the record with YouTube. We haven't heard anything as far as FEMA giving money for the flooding in September, but they have approved low interest loans with the SBA. So starting yesterday, the SBA has representatives up at the Lackawanna County Emergency Facility up in Jessup. And they're going to be there Monday through Friday, 9 to 6, and on Saturdays, 10 to 2 through February 15th. They can there to answer questions, help you through the process, show you how to apply. Eligible is homeowners, renters that had damage, nonprofits and or businesses. And with businesses, it would be losses as well, potential losses to the business. So like I said, if you have questions, they're the people to answer it. I think the applications have to be in by May 15th, but definitely they're only going to be there till February 15th to help. So just spread the word if you
So
would.
these are loans to residents.
Correct. Nonprofits are eligible for a 2.375 loan, 2.5% loan for the residential, and the commercial 3 to 5%, depending, something close to that. 4% for businesses, sorry. Yeah.
But unfortunately though, with the municipalities, there's no reimbursements yet. I know we
No.
were about 100,000, was it more than?
We were closer to 500,000, although actually we were able to do some of the repairs. We've done most of them already. And we were able to do some of them for less than what was originally expected. So I'd say more like 250 is what we've spent so far. So would be nice if we would get something, but we haven't.
No loans to
I
municipalities.
haven't heard, no, I just haven't heard. And I asked the EMA and he hasn't responded yet, so.
Okay. Well, could keep it ear to the ground.
Yep.
Okay, well, we can get the word out on that, Virginia, and see if we'd like to take
Yep.
advantage of it, you know. At least moving in a good direction.
Mhm.
Okay, the first item is our Ransom Police Service.
Right, we have a response from Joe O'Brien. First of all, one of the things that I expressed concern with all along, and I haven't, finally the union came and talked to me about it, the representative from the police union. Our proposal for ransom is assuming a new officer. As far as the police union is concerned, there is no existing officer that wants the job, so it would go to a new officer. But they are not willing to put that in writing. Meaning that if somebody decided they wanted something, they'd have a legitimate claim. And that's my concern. And especially when we started quoting Newton, and I'm thinking, well, we've really got a problem because our quotes are going on the low rate, which first year is 75%. Whereas our senior guys are 16% above rather than 75% of base. It's a big difference. So I asked Joe O'Brien to look into it. They haven't talked to their union about it, solicitor, but apparently he feels that they're holding out to use it as a negotiating tool because their contract's up and they'll be negotiating that this spring. But that doesn't really help us. So I'm not sure where to go with this or what we want to do, because when we decide the contract with Ransom, the tentative one now, has in there an MOU from the union.
Right, right.
So, and they very politely told me that, well, you quoted the new guy, that was your mistake.
Well, but at the same time, what we have told Ransom Township is that we will bill them at cost. If that cost turns out to be different,
Right,
we're covered there. It just is in good faith, they ought to have an expectation for, we should be able to provide a decent estimate for year one. If
right,
that estimate is significantly different. You know, that's a
Right.
little bit unfair to them,
Yeah.
from our standpoint.
I'm not worried about it with Ransom, it's just with Newton now. You know, when we're talking about maybe a second officer, what happened? Well, I can tell you, for example, Eric Williams is interested in one of these positions. Well, Eric is our most senior guy. If the union took his side and let him apply for one of them, like I said, the difference between what his salary is versus what we quoted is significant. So it's,
Right.
It's
And
gonna
he
be
would-
hard.
He would have the right,
he would have the right unless
as
the
a
union.
senior union member, to get that
Right.
position.
So that's the only pitch that I see, that I think that we need to figure out. The other thing is, Ransom did say a couple of things. They wanted to add language in paragraph 3A, providing the chief will establish a weekly schedule, including additional language that allows input regarding, from the representative. Obviously, that's not an issue. Ransom?
I did send feedback back by email about their feedback. Did
Right.
that get sent on to them? Did Joe communicate? that?
Yes, I did forward it on. I haven't heard anything since.
Okay.
The other thing I'm looking at here too, Virginia, after I reread this a little bit more. In section E, with the 5 years, that either one of us can basically desire to terminate the
Mhm.
contract. I don't think that should be allowed.
No,
I am absolutely adamant that they not have any right for termination for.
Yeah, no,
That is, that's an absolute. no.
doesn't hurt to ask, but I agree, and I think we
Yeah.
can tell Joe that. Yeah, so that one will do.
You know, I do wonder, there are points about damages in the event of termination. If they don't have the right for termination, that's relevant. I
Right,
mean, the only, it's insolvency, I suppose, would be the only risk.
Right.
That would cause us,
mhm,
it would cause any kind of termination, but
Right.
so I don't know what your opinion is on that, but that clause as it is in there right now is somewhat
Mm-hmm.
irrelevant.
I would agree, especially if we're gonna take out language that they cannot terminate.
Right.
Right.
Why have damages?
We could have the right,
Right.
but us having this given.
So I would be comfortable with moving that because they don't have a right to terminate.
Well, that's the thing would be if they terminate it, then you have to establish the damages through the breach of contract. So that would be the harder part. I'd rather have a fixed number, so we don't have to establish damages and explain to a court why we're entitled to this or that. So that would just be, that's just one less element that proof you go to court.
They would, in that case, though, they would terminate in violation of the agreement.
exactly,
Mhm.
breach of contract.
Yeah, but you still have to show damages. There's duty
Right.
breach causation.
Okay.
So they have. a
Well, I
duty-
defer to, I mean, I
Yeah, I
defer
just-
to both of you on that.
No, I was just saying, I would, damages are, if we can establish damages and make sure that it's at least a minimum threshold, we won't have to. won't have to get into any issues about doing it or not. The other thing, I guess you said the collective bargaining agreement is gonna expire this summer.
It expires December 31st.
Oh, so-
But because it's subject to arbitration, we have to have it resolved by June 30th, or it automatically gets filed with the arbitrator. It's still giving us another 6 months to settle. But and it'd take that long to get an arbitrator in, but it starts the process, which means we'd have to start paying money for it. So yeah, we're gonna have to get working on that sooner rather than later. I'm sure the union will write us a letter probably beginning of April.
And then if it goes to arbitration, then it's a binding arbitration.
Yes.
So we'd
Yeah.
rather try to work that before.
Yes. Going back to the contract, though, one of the things too is they're talking about Ransom not being able to offer workers' comp. That's true. It's our employee. They're gonna be covered under our workers' comp.
Right.
You know, so that, and then carrying 100 or $1 million in general liability is what we have, so I'm not worried about that.
Okay.
So for the most part, but then they're also talking about needing less protection during the winter and more protection during the summer. Well,
I made that comment, maybe that's,
yeah,
I don't know, their solicitor's not understanding the arrangement that we are talking
right.
about here.
they can ask Chris if he can staff additional people, but that's in the contract saying, we'll make best efforts. That's it. No promises.
Otherwise, it's a full-time
Right.
fixed schedule.
Right.
Right.
So I know your input went, I'll give Joe some input back tomorrow based on our discussion today and see where it goes.
Well,
Okay?
this topic though of which officer ends up out there is really important. What, explain to me how, if we sign this agreement tomorrow, how would it play out in an officer putting their name forward and saying, I want that position? What would the time frame of that look like? Will that really end up a bargaining chip in the collective bargaining agreement if that's happening in the month
If
of
we don't
March or
have it in
April?
the MOU, then if Eric Williams right now is, he's fighting us with the workers' comp or the heart and lung. And the union is representing them not because they want to, but because he's a dues paying union member, so they're gonna do it. So it's just gonna be the same thing. If there's a point where one of the members decides they want to take one of those positions, they're gonna have the right to ask for it because shifts are available based on your seniority. So that is the dilemma with this. There is no interest right now in ransom. I doubt that there'll be interest in Newton, but that doesn't mean tomorrow, the next day, next year, things won't change.
Our intention is to have a single officer who is assigned to this patrol essentially all the time. But in
Right.
reality, for scheduling purposes, every time the schedule comes up, an officer could say, I want that shift. Even if they're not quote unquote the person we hired for that patrol.
No, we do have a rotation. So if we hire somebody for ransom, they're hired for ransom. But what if the officer at some point says, you know what? I want to bid for that shift. And we say, no, sorry.
What cadence does that happen? That's what I'm trying to understand.
Well, I think what you're saying is, so we hire a new officer and they have the least amount of seniority, and we may designate that new officer as the ransom police officer. But at the end of the day, if
The
a
union
more
could fight
senior,
us.
senior
Yeah.
officer wants that shift and says, the Newton ransom or Newton officer staying
Yeah.
Clark Summit, I want to go out to ransom.
They basically.
And that could happen at any time. That could happen for like 6 months.
Is there percent Patterson? I'm gonna turn it down and they're gonna grieve it. And that's what's gonna happen.
But if Officer Williams wants this position, are we obligated to give it to him, or can we still advertise to hire someone for the position?
Well, we could hire
Well,
someone
he-
new. to shift.
Yeah.
We're gonna hire somebody new because we need an extra officer. Question is, if somebody wants it, and Officer Williams really isn't eligible for it because he's still not back to work.
Right.
You know, we can't hold it for him. We don't know how long he's gonna be out, so we
But he
can,
could return to work and 2 months later say, I want it.
Right.
right.
And the issue is we're gonna hire someone promising them this position, but at any point, a senior officer can almost take it.
So
Right.
would it be better for us? Now, this imposes some risk on us, which is what concerns me. Would it be better for us to bill to ransom or to Newton for that matter? The average of our full-time officers' hourly rate. So if we have 5 full-time officers and they make a range, we bill to them the average so that whoever is on, we're charging them the same rate.
Mhm.
In that case, it costs them more if that ends up being a junior officer, but it protects us. And in the other case, if it's Eric Williams, they actually get a senior officer subsidized by us, which is a risk to us.
Right.
But is that simply a simpler and fairer way to do
That
it?
might be
I
a
would-
good
I
way
would
to
think
do it,
that would
or, to be honest, we're paying them the minimum, we're paying the senior guy the maximum. If we're still putting out the same amount of money, no matter who's working which shifts, it's really gonna be more of an issue of displacing, somebody.
We take a senior officer out of our borough.
Right,
Where our taxpayers are paying for that officer. We put them in another township and we
Right.
subsidize it. That's the
Right.
problem.
yeah,
But I don't know a fairer way to
Yeah.
do it.
So-
Maybe we could let them know the most expensive option, just so that they're not feel like we're giving them
I'll convey that information to Joe and he can pass that along.
Or I mean, in that case, your reconciliations are a little bit more complicated all the time because you have to know exactly who worked the shift out there and bill them at that exact rate.
Right,
Yeah.
I just don't want them to feel like we told them it was gonna cost this and then it actually cost.
Yeah,
something
100%.
more. That
Yeah.
would not make it-
So-
We didn't misrepresent that, it's
No.
just.
I
more
will,
Complicated than we thought.
yeah, I will tell them. I mean, I will let Joe know to talk to them about it. The fact is, we will have a junior officer out there because as of right now, that's the only one that wants it.
But that could change.
But it could
That could change
change
at any time.
and, you know, if it does, we need to just settle that. Okay?
And what happens? You deny it and then they're gonna file a grievance.
They
correct?
file a grievance, right? And then council can deny the grievance and then they go to arbitration.
But
So-
we do have a collective bargaining agreement coming up maybe for next year, so we could have that specifically and then take. it
We
out
can
of-
get that addressed. And I would imagine that yeah, I agree with Joe. It's probably a bargaining position. It's probably something where they'll be willing to concede that in lieu of something else.
Well, I mean, if they've already told us that they are unwilling to sign an MOU, we're gonna have to remove this clause H from this agreement because this agreement is contingent on it.
Right.
Okay, so, okay. So I'll convey this information to Joe tomorrow.
And actually, in the long run, I would think that we should definitely maybe have another full-time officer that could fill in if something did come up where our original policeman couldn't make it, or something. You always have to have a backup, someone to cover in case he got sick or something. like
Well,
that.
if he's on vacation or sick, we just pull
We're-
another officer.
Right.
Well,
correct?
no, we don't provide.
We're
We're
service.
not providing service. We're saying that it's the one officer and when he
We don't
takes a
have
vacation, they're not covered.
That's right, yeah.
Right, so we would, so,
Okay.
yeah, the shift is just open then at that point. It's not.
So
to
they
be
just don't
filled.
have coverage if that person's on vacation.
And if they want it, they'll pay more for it, if we can fill it.
Right, if we can fill it.
Both of those are.
Chris will do his
Yeah.
due diligence, but that's all we're promising.
Yeah. If the extra request to fill position, if the officer, for God forbid, ends up on some extended medical leave, gets an injury, are they paying that extra to have that position filled as well, or are we taking the responsibility?
If the officer is out on disability, then they're out without an officer. And that's the whole thing that's understood. They're at risk because they picked one officer. It's just like if they hired him directly, they'd be at risk.
But
We're
they
not
also-
offering any protection to them.
Okay,
But they also have state police coverage, so.
Right.
They're not completely out there
Right.
alone, so.
okay.
Now, regarding Newton Township, I gave you a sample of the numbers and I know I forwarded them too, that I provided to them. I know that they wanted it last Wednesday for a meeting. I haven't heard, I asked Chris, he hasn't heard anything, so we don't know where they stand. Chris did mention that South Ave is back trying to woo them again, so. Yeah.
And we're not gonna compete with South Ave.
Really,
They want.
my understanding of what Chris shared with me is that
Sure.
South Abington's proposing a very different model than we are
Right.
proposing.
Absolutely.
We're proposing what we're comfortable with. If that's
Right.
what they want, the price we have it, great.
Yeah.
And if they
Right.
don't, also great.
I
Right.
feel the same
If
way,
they
too.
want the model that South Ave, I mean, what South Ave is proposing is basically what they proposed in the past and haven't been able to fulfill. If they
Yeah.
want to gamble on that, that's their choice. So, we don't need this. We're not looking to do this. We're not selling this. They asked, and so we're trying to accommodate our neighbors. So with no loss if we don't get it. So we'll see what happens.
Right. Yeah. On our terms, that's the way we have to run it, you know. Okay, thank you. And then TCC Virginia.
Yeah, in our reorganization meeting, we did not have interested parties for the TCC,
What's
Position?
that stand for, if you don't mind me asking?
Tax Collection Committee. The county is now, as a group, having representatives from all the communities to make decisions as a group for the collection of earned income and local services taxes. Per capita too, but we don't have a per capita. So we need a representative for the borough, and Bob Bennett has offered his time to do so. He's very interested in servicing the community. Same with the vacancy board chair. He's willing to take that position. So if you guys are so inclined, somebody can make a motion and we can vote on it next week.
Next week.
So the TCC is just, it's more of an advisory type of thing. You work with other municipalities in Lackawanna.
Right, they're gonna represent the borough's interests at these community meetings, and then their job is to kind of keep us in the loop if there's any decisions that need to be made or anything that's happening that would impact us.
And then the vacancy board, that's like, unless if we're unable to select somebody as a replacement, then it will
Right.
fall back to the vacancy board.
Exactly, we have 30 days to fill a seat if somebody steps down. If
Right.
within 30 days we can't, then the vacancy board takes over
Right.
and they have 15 days. And then if they can't, it goes to court.
There's like 3 people on the vacancy board, or is it just 1?
I believe because somebody would step down, it's 6 of you guys. I believe it's that person is the chair breaker. Or excuse me, the tiebreaker. He's the chair of you 6 and then he would be the tiebreaker. So I think that's how it works. We've never needed it, thank
No,
goodness.
I was gonna say that's never.
And I don't know that we ever will. The only, if we just can't find volunteers, which as long as Jerry's here, she's good at that.
Yeah.
Right, Ronnie?
Yes, still find some.
Yeah,
Well, as long as we have Bob on board, I think we're okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wasn't Shannon Brown at one point, he was on that TCC,
no, he was on SAPA.
on SAPA?
He was on SAPA for it, huh?
And he was on planning.
And planning, yes, and planning.
Okay.
And that is the last thing on our agenda is, Shannon is a representative, or excuse me, a resident of the borough. He has requested us to amend the ordinance that we adopted, for noise to. The big changes that he wants to see is, and let me just verify that again. He wants to remove the definition of 10 PM to 7 AM. So he feels that noise, the definition of noise is, basically where it irritates. Let me read it to you.
Let us know what page that's on.
Noise is any unwanted sound or vibration that encroaches on the real property of another. So he's saying noise is noise, whether it's day or night, if it's unwanted noise. We obviously have the right for reasonable cases where, construction, landscapers, things like that.
Right.
But, this is a tough one. He presents in his argument, and it's a really valid point. Let me see if I can just find it real quick. He was explaining that the people's right the people, well, I can't find the quote, but people have the right to quiet enjoyment of their property. And that is in the Constitution. So that means quiet, and that means that people, yes, they're allowed to talk, yes, they're allowed to make noise. But if that volume leaves their property to the point where it offends a neighbor, then the neighbor's rights are being trampled on, and that's the presentation that he's making, and he's.
Yeah, well, let me say this, Chris and I talked about this. One of the biggest claims, and I think if we stopped it, would be the laughing stock of this area. And that is boys playing basketball next door. What do you want? Is it better to have these kids playing basketball? Or would you rather hanging out on Main Street, getting into trouble? They're boys playing basketball. So what are we gonna pick on next? I can't read my book when they're playing basketball. Well, this is the way life is. I mean, we kids play outside. That means I have to tell my neighbor to keep his 3 kids quiet. Should we do that? I think this is ridiculous. I think it's ridiculous. Because you got a bunch of boys playing, I don't know if anybody here played back. Josh, you must have played basketball, I would imagine.
I actually did not, but.
Okay. It is a situation where one person can cause many problems in the borough.
Right, it's one person. that we're-
And.
That is the current ordinance. One of the things that he asked to have changed in our current ordinance, it says that the complaint has to come from at least two neighbors, two separate unrelated parties. And he feels that that's over onerous on
How
somebody.
are we going to enforce that? They call the police.
Right.
And the boys are not making noise at that time. They ran up there for nothing, but I think it's more with the way the world is today. I would much rather see kids playing basketball. Or 10 o'clock is not late.
Mhm.
And, you know, Chris told me, you know, when they make a basket, they applaud. This is innocent fun. Or we can do like we pick up in the newspaper and we can see where someone shot somebody and drug deals going down. I think it would be an embarrassment for this borough to have this ordinance. It'd be ridiculous.
We recently revised our noise.
Yes.
ordinance, So it was a couple,
Yes,
2 years.
and these are the
ago,
two big changes to the new one. Is one of the things, the planning commission specifically required that it be two separate unrelated neighbors at least, or a police officer making the observation in order to qualify it, because they didn't want one person's complaint to override anybody else's rights. I think they were leaning more towards the reasonable man statute, or standard, but that being said, he's asking for it to be changed and he is giving legal argument for it. And I think that we need to have this discussion next week.
All the
and-
years that you've been on, borough manager, how many complaints have you had from kids playing basketball next door?
What?
Yeah, it definitely opens the door for people who may be sensitive, who maybe.
So yeah, so a dog barks or something now and all of a sudden we're, and this sounds to me as if, yeah, it just, yeah, get rid of 10 to 7.
Yeah.
This can be noise anytime during the day.
The dog barking, that is something I hear all the time. And what are we gonna keep writing tickets? Because somebody, when they're inside the house, you know, yeah, you can hear them barking outside and it's annoying, but if they're inside the house, what more can you do?
I just could not
I do have to say, as the sister of a landscaper, the leaf blower in here, he's suggesting that they be eliminated, leaf blowers not be allowed, and I'm thinking, good luck with that one, you're not
Oh,
gonna
yeah.
get a
Yeah,
landscaping
come in my
company
neighborhood.
that doesn't use it. Huh?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Come in my neighborhood.
And I know Shannon is a great member of the community, does a lot of great things and he's involved with, but
Right.
it's almost like buyer beware. I mean, if you're gonna buy a house in Clark Summit and you're gonna be close, you're gonna have neighbors, maybe a country living may suit him better or something like
I
that.
agree about it.
Yeah.
I know where his house is and I can't see where there is a basketball hoop that.
He lives on a corner, the house on the other corner. They had, it's new owners now, so that's not an issue now, but they had a U-shaped driveway and there was a
Right.
basketball on there. And it was on the side of the house nearest to him. Also, the one neighbor that directly abuts him has an in-ground pool and the kids, you know, the properties are small and close together and kids in the pool, you know, water amplifies noise.
Could you imagine if a bunch of kids were playing in the pool in the middle of the day, yelling and screaming, and the ordinance kicks in? We wouldn't want it to leave the borough because it would be embarrassing.
we do need to respect the fact that Shannon is a resident with rights and he is very community focused and oriented. And he has the right to request this.
Yeah.
So next week we'll fade it out and
Is he gonna come? and speak?
no, he's gonna observe it. He cannot attend health issues. He
Oh.
cannot come to the meeting.
Oh.
So he's gonna be either he's watching right now or he's gonna be watching the YouTube, because he verified with me that it's gonna be on YouTube. So he will be kept up to date, and he wants to know what's happening, so
I think
I,
he said he could participate remotely if I. read
we
correctly.
could, we don't have a policy that allows that right now. We'd have to make an exception for him if we wanted.
But I
Because-
guess we could speak to him individually if we wanted to. or
Absolutely.
something, And he could.
And I'm sure he'd be happy to talk to any one of you. Yeah, and you have his email address in here. I can forward his phone number to you all if it's, I think that's even in here, but if it's not, I'll forward it to you.
Okay.
Okay,
Thank you.
sure. That's our agenda.
And then the next
Yeah,
thing-
and then we just have next week's agenda. We have a whole bunch of minutes getting caught up next week. We also had 3 pieces of equipment from the DPW that are on municipal. So we will be voting to accept the bids next week, and then we can sell this equipment. We're doing well. The one truck is dead in the water. Like you can't, it's gonna have to be towed out of here. Bids are almost up to 5,000 already on it. So municipal has been a blessing to us. I mean, there is a lot of value to it. It's got the plow, it's got the salt spreader. So there is value, but if we just, put it in the paper, we wouldn't get nearly that amount. So we're really blessed that municipal came along and we're allowed to use it.
Those 2 items alone are worth $5,000 on it.
Right, but try to get it.
Oh, exactly, yeah, so that,
Yeah.
I mean, that's a good. thing.
Municipal gives us more
Definitely.
power to to really get it out there and have competition on it.
One quick question. How's the trash collection going on fees and stuff? Are we doing well with that or?
I will have a report next week for what happened in January, but yeah, things are going really well. We so many people, we're billing them 48 quarterly. So many people think that it's 48 monthly. So we're
Exactly,
already
yeah.
getting second and third payments. And we're writing them and saying no. I ask you to also, if anybody asks you, remind them there's 2 separate links on the website. If they do want to pay by credit card, be sure to use the right one. If they're making a sewer payment, click on the sewer button. If they're
Right.
making trash, because we've had them mixed up and ultimately it
Yeah.
requires a lot of bookkeeping and journal entries and transfers between accounts. And it's just
Yeah,
not worth the effort.
exactly.
But no, it's going very well, we've had a few bumps at the beginning with the questions or arguments, but actually so much better than we ever expected, I think.
I think people in the borough understand that the borough didn't create this.
Yeah.
If you want to complain,
Well, Newton's rates went up significantly, South Ave's rates went up significantly. We're still absorbing a good chunk of their cost, so our rates were not huge compared to everybody else's. So I think that's the other thing that
I
you know,
think Jessup.
anything else?
Well run meeting.
Style.
Actually, where you typically went from an hour, but this is still fast. Okay, so I guess we're done.